A body is dug up from its grave. Its nails have grown longer. Its skin looks fuller than the day it died. Blood pools at the corners of its mouth. To modern eyes, this is simple biology, decomposition, gas buildup, skin shrinkage exposing the nails. But to the people who dug up that grave thousands of years ago, this was proof of something else entirely. The dead were not staying dead. Long before Dracula, before Transylvania, before a single vampire novel was ever written, ancient humans were already terrified of the same thing. And in village after village, across continents that never even knew of each other's existence, they came to almost the exact same conclusion. So were ancient humans actually aware of vampires? Let's dig into it literally. Vampire-like beings show up in some of the oldest written records humans ever produced. In ancient Mesopotamia, over 4,000 years ago, people feared the Ekimu, restless, spirits of the improperly buried dead who returned to drain the life force of the living. The Babylonians and Assyrians wrote protective spells against them on clay tablets, some of the earliest anti-vampire instructions ever recorded. In ancient Greece, there was the Vrikolakas, a corpse believed to rise from its grave, and in some tellings, knock on the doors of family members at night. Folklore held that if you answered on the first knock, you would die. The dead, it was believed, only knocked once. Rome had its own version too, the Strix, a bird-like creature said to feed on human blood and flesh, particularly targeting infants. These weren't isolated superstitions. They were a pattern, and that pattern shows up almost everywhere humans have lived. In Slavic Europe, the belief became the most detailed of all. Villages across Serbia, Russia, and Romania developed elaborate rules. The dead could return as Yupari or Yupar if they had been sinners, suicides, or excommunicated, or if an animal had jumped over their corpse before burial. In China, the jiangshi, the hopping corpse, was said to be reanimated by an imbalance of spiritual energy after death, feeding on the life force of the living, moving stiffly because rigor mortis had never fully left its limbs. In West Africa and parts of the Caribbean, stories of the Abayafo described witches who left their bodies at night to drain the life essence of children. Different continents, different religions, different languages, and yet, corpses that don't stay dead, that hunger for the living, that must be stopped before they claim more victims. When completely disconnected cultures land on the same fear again and again, that's usually a sign that fear is rooted in something real that humans everywhere were actually encountering. Here's where it gets interesting, because ancient people weren't imagining the evidence. They were misreading it. When a body decomposes, gases build up inside it. This causes the abdomen to swell, which can force blood up through the mouth and nose, making a corpse look like it had recently fed. The skin dries and pulls back from the nails and teeth, making both look like they had grown after death. Fingernails on a corpse can appear far longer than they were in life for the same reason. Some corpses, depending on soil conditions, decompose very slowly. Villagers who dug up a grave weeks or months later, expecting a skeleton, would instead find a body that looked disturbingly fresh, bloated, dark-skinned, with hair and nails that seemed to have kept growing. To someone with no concept of bacterial decomposition, that could only mean one thing. This person had not truly died. There's also a medical condition called porphyria, a rare blood disorder that can cause extreme sensitivity to sunlight, pale skin, and in some cases receding gums that make the teeth appear longer. People with severe, untreated porphyria in small isolated communities may have fueled real, living fears about their neighbors. And then there's rabies. In the late stages, rabies can cause aggression, insomnia, sensitivity to light, and even a documented tendency to bite. Some historians have pointed to correlations between rabies outbreaks in animal populations and spikes in vampire panics in the same regions during the same years. None of this required a supernatural explanation. But without germ theory, without an understanding of decomposition, without modern medicine, this was the most logical explanation available. Fear like this didn't stay in stories. It shaped how people actually buried their dead. Archaeologists have uncovered vampire burials. Across Europe, skeletons buried with iron rods, driven through the chest, heavy stones placed over the mouth or jaw, sickles positioned across the neck or throat so that if the corpse tried to rise, it would decapitate itself. In Bulgaria alone, more than 100 such burials have been found. In Venice, archaeologists discovered a 16th-century female skeleton, buried with a brick deliberately wedged into her mouth, a known ritual specifically used to stop suspected shroud-eating vampires from rising and returning to feed. In New England, as late as the 1800s, long after most of Europe had abandoned these beliefs, families in Rhode Island and Connecticut exhumed relatives who had died of tuberculosis, believing the disease was actually the dead feeding on the living from beyond the grave. In some cases, the heart was removed and burned, and the ashes were mixed into a tonic given to sick family members to drink, in the hope of stopping the vampire from draining them further. These weren't isolated madness. Tuberculosis spreads slowly through a household. One family member dies, then another sickens, then another, without any concept of contagious bacteria. Watching a disease pass invisibly from the dead to the living looked exactly like something feeding on the family, one person at a time. Ancient humans never saw a vampire, but they were absolutely aware of something, a real, observable, terrifying pattern, bodies that didn't decompose the way they expected, diseases that seemed to spread invisibly from the dead, and rare medical conditions that made the living look unsettlingly different from everyone around them. They didn't have the biology to explain any of it, so they built an explanation out of the only tools they had: fear, folklore, and ritual. And because the same biological and medical realities exist everywhere humans live, cultures with zero contact with each other independently built nearly identical monsters to explain them. In a way, the vampire wasn't invented once. It was invented dozens of times, by dozens of unconnected societies, all trying to make sense of the same unsettling facts about death. The next time you watch a vampire movie, remember the fangs, the cape, the castle in Transylvania. That's fiction built centuries later. But underneath it is something much older and much more human. The fear of what happens after we die, and the desperate need of ancient people to explain the unexplainable. They weren't wrong to be afraid. They were just missing 400 years of science. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient fears and the real history hiding behind them, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.